Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. This is a new presentation from www.central-mosque.com and the Humble Heart YouTube channel. Before I begin to talk about the topic itself, I did a presentation a few weeks ago about why, in my opinion, Israel will not survive or Israel will not last. The link is right here in the top right-hand corner. Please feel free to watch that presentation. The topic today is the Hannibal Directive of the Israeli military. So he came up with this doctrine or strategy, whatever you want to call it. So the historical background, it's still classified, but there's a chance in the mid-90s Hezbollah ambushed some Israeli soldiers in South Lebanon, and these three guys are the architects of this Hannibal Directive, Hannibal Doctrine, Hannibal Strategy, whatever you want to call it. Major General Yossi Palad, Colonel Gaba Ashkenazi, and Colonel Yakov Emedror. So what is the Hannibal Directive? Again, it's classified, it's been modified a few times, but this is what I found on the internet from 2014. So this, remember, there has changed several times, so we don't know if this is the correct wording of the directive at this time. We don't know that. But in 2014, it says, during a kidnapping, the main task becomes to rescue our soldiers from the abductors, even at the cost of harming or injuring our soldiers. If the abductors and the kidnapped are identified and the calls are not heeded, a firearm must be fired to bring the kidnappers to the ground or arrest them. If the vehicle or the hijackers do not stop, they should be fired at individually, intentionally, in order to hit the hijackers, even if it means harming our own soldiers. This presentation right here in the top right hand corner of your screen, this is when I talked about why Israel will not last. And I talked about the strategy, the deliberate strategy of beyond apartheid, genocide of the Palestinian people. So this Hannibal Directive, it actually means turning an area into an extermination zone. So listen to those words. They're not talking about a kill zone, extermination zone. What that means is basically exterminate every single thing within a particular zone. So there was a probe within the Israeli army, and it found the extensive probe also investigated one of the most controversial incidents of the day, during which IDF tanks shelled the house of resident Pessi Cohen, where Hamas was holding hostages. The probe will be made public later in the day. So, you know, when the Western media talks about a lot of casualties within the IDF or Israeli citizens, etc., it is possible, in fact, it's probable, that a number of them are being killed by the Israelis themselves and not the Palestinians. The Israeli media actually talks about it, and they're actually proud of this fact, and a lot of this stuff does not make it to the Western media. So this guy is Brigadier General Barak Hiram, and the Haaretz newspaper says, who's Barak Hiram? The IDF general who ordered tank fire on a kibbutz home with 13 hostages inside. So, you know, in the military, when you look at rules of engagement, you don't fire up when civilians are in danger, or you know, your own people are in danger. However, the Israeli media is openly talking about the fact this brigadier ordered the fire to be opened on a kibbutz house with 13 Israeli hostages inside. So when you talk about the coverage of the genocide and the barbarity which is on display in Palestine against the Palestinian innocent children, civilians, and babies, the bias of the Western media is not something which the Muslims are conjuring up. It is actually well known. So this is an article from, I believe it's from Al Jazeera, and it says the BBC has been accused by its journalists of failing to tell the story of the Israel-Palestine conflict accurately, investing greater effort in humanizing Israeli victims compared with the Palestinians, and omitting key historical context in coverage. By the way, there have been studies on how the BBC and the Western media actually frames the atrocities which are occurring to the Israelis versus what's actually happening to the Palestinians. They call the atrocities or killings of the Israelis. They call it barbarity, they call it genocide, they call it all kinds of stuff. Versus when it happens to the Palestinians, they do report it, but report it using completely different words. In a 2,300 word letter written to Al Jazeera by 8 UK-based journalists employed by the corporation, the BBC is also said to be guilty of double standards in how civilians are seen. By the way, they don't employ the same tactic, and let's continue, given that it is unflinching in its reporting of alleged Russian war crimes in Ukraine. There are stories upon stories upon stories of Israeli army opening fire when their own soldiers or civilians are in direct line of that fire. One of the most tragic incidents is of this 12-year-old girl, Liel Hetrozoni, and there was a funeral in Israel, and in contrast to the Judaic tradition, the body of this 12-year-old child was not there. And people simply attended the funeral without the body, and they prayed for her, etc. All of the rituals. However, her body was not there. Later on, what happened is there's an Israeli citizen who's come forward, Yasmin Porat, and this is the sketch of or an image of her interview on CNN. So she's been interviewed in CNN, and she's been interviewed elsewhere. What is deeply disturbing is what Yasmin Porat said in Israel while giving interviews to Israeli media that has not been reported in the West. What she said in a full-length interview, Porat states that the Palestinian fighters, who she says treated her and the other Israeli civilians humanely, intended kidnap us to Gaza, not to murder us. So she's talking about the Palestinian fighters. She adds that after we were there for 2 hours with the abductors, the police arrived. The Israeli police arrived. A gun battle takes place that our police started. The reason the testimony of Yasmin Porat is important is this 12-year-old Lail Hatrozoni, according to many accounts, it was the Israeli army and the Israeli police or Israeli paramilitary forces, however you want to put it, that opened fire that could have possibly killed Lail Hatrozoni. And the reason her body was not present, etc., is there's a lot of, and I don't know, this is all conspiracy theory land, that basically there was evidence of her being killed by Israeli fire, Israeli bullets, Israeli weapons, etc., and that was one of the reasons why her body was not found. So I'm going to end this presentation right here, and you're not going to hear this in the Western media as to what this Hannibal Directive is, but there is ample evidence that this is actually being employed by Israel, and the report is in Israeli media itself. So this Hannibal Directive, this is all coming from Israeli media, by the way. Haaretz says that IDF ordered Hannibal Directive on October 7th to prevent Hamas taking soldiers captive. There was crazy hysteria, and decisions started being made without verified information. Documents and testimonies obtained by Haaretz reveal the Hannibal operational order, which directs the use of force to prevent soldiers from being taken into captivity, was employed at 3 army facilities infiltrated by Hamas, potentially endangering civilians as well. In any other military, right, there would have been some sort of a report to people been taken to task, being tried under the for example, in America, in Uniform Code of Military Justice, etc. However, that is not the case. The Israeli army, the way they portray this kind of stuff is they portray these generals as being daring, brave, etc., who actually order fires knowing fully well that they're Israeli citizens inside. I'm going to leave you with this chilling thought that basically think about an army which is capable of opening fire when it knows its own soldiers are inside. So in the description, in the comment section, I'm going to leave a link to Yasmin Porat's interview to Israeli media. Please watch that clip. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.